Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation. I'm Cassie, and today we're going to be talking a bit about government and music during the Bosnian War. So let's jump right into it. All right, so here you see a map of the former Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia started breaking up in 1991 when Slovenia and Croatia both seceded. Bosnia and Herzegovina seceded in 1992. As you can see on this map, it was very ethnically diverse in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and as they were trying to establish a new government here, um, there was there was a nationalist group amongst the Bosnian Serbs who made up about 33% of the population who did not like the new government and believed that there was the intention to take power away from the Serbs. So they got the support of the Serbian government, who believed in an ethnic right to the land in Bosnia, and they brought the forces in and attacked. Um, Croatia joined the war for a similar reason. There is a large population of Bosnian Croats, and they wanted to add that land to the Croatian state. As far as music in this area goes, there had been a lot of regulation on nationalistic music ever since Yugoslavia was established as a communist nation in 1946, to the point that it was illegal to have national music that elevated one ethnicity over another. Because they wanted to really promote the Yugoslav identity over separate states. In 1980, when President Tito died, the regulations were relaxed, and there was a revival of national sentiments and, along with it, national music and patriotic music. At the same time, there was also the introduction of Western music to consider, and rock especially got very, very popular in Yugoslavia. So by the time the wars came around, the stage was already set for governments to take advantage of the music that was already there. Governments have been using music for specific purposes in war since war has been around, pretty much. Music is very useful. It can be used for morale boosting. It can create an image. It can develop public opinion on something, or it can other another group of people. In this war, it was used in the camps as a form of humiliation, to the point that it's even showed up many, many times in the war crime trials that have followed the Yugoslav wars. We're going to be looking particularly at what kind of music the governments promoted in this conflict. In these areas, the music industry was typically controlled by one or two very, very big companies they did all the recording, the broadcasting, the distribution, everything. And a lot of times states would sponsor these organizations, and that's how they had direct access to the music industry and control over what people were hearing. So let's start with Serbian war music. So some common traits of Serbian war music are going to be a intended domestic audience. Typically, they're just expecting Serbs to listen to it. Every so often, they might expect enemies to hear it and be demoralized, but for the most part, it's for a domestic audience. Serbian war music is very traditional. There was a historic national revival going on in Serbia that was promoted by the president, and music was part of it. You'll hear a lot of accordion, especially, and gusle, which is a one-stringed bowed instrument. There are a lot of themes of Serbian greatness and glorious victory over their weak and cowardly enemies. And in that note, there's a lot of imagery of weaponry and violence in music videos and in lyrics. So music in Serbia at the time of the Bosnian War can really be broken into three categories. The first is war music from World War I and World War II. From that 1980s revival, there was a ton of it. What you're seeing here is actually a cassette release in 1995 of a bunch of really old Serbian patriotic songs. So you see a lot of things like this popping up, and famous artists covering old songs and rewriting them in a different, more modern style. The second type we see a lot of is new folk, which is really directly inspired by folk. It's just folk music with a more modern take, hence new folk music. The one I have here for you is called We Serbs Are Supermen, and we're just going to watch a few moments of this.
Nismo Srbi supermeni, ratujemo protiv sveta, zarad sveti mi smo spremni, makar trajao i 100 leta. Nismo Srbi supermeni, ratujemo protiv sveta, zarad sveti mi smo spremni, makar trajao i 100 leta.
All right, so you hear the traditional instruments there as well as the traditional singing style, but the Western rhythm is also very clear. It's a rock rhythm. You also see the military imagery, this man in front of tanks. This is pretty common. Singers in military uniforms in front of tanks, sometimes holding huge assault rifles. Very, very common in Serbian or music videos. And then we also see the theme of Serbian greatness in the lyrics. The third type of music is a broader class of what we call alternative, which mainly consists of rock. Rock was really, really popular in Serbia before Yugoslavia broke up, especially among young urbanites. But as the war neared, the Serbian Nationalist Party really started taking over the cities and taking over the government positions. And the Serbian nationalists didn't care for alternative. A lot of times because alternative was the preference of the young liberals, and the topics would tend to be against nationalist sentiments, often even anti-war. So by the time the government came around to becoming pretty much controlled by the Serbian nationalists, the alternative rock music was exactly what Serbian nationalists did not want people to be promoting on the airwaves. So because of that, during the war, it was very, very hard to succeed as a rock musician or to make a living off of it because there was just no channels where you could distribute or market your music. So a lot of it happened over local radio and selling cassette tapes on street corners, all very local. Let's move on to Croatian war music. It is in stark contrast to Serbian war music. First of all, because the Croatian government always wanted to keep an international audience in mind. It was the goal of the Croatian government to create a Croatian identity that was very distinct from the rest of Yugoslavia and that was very modern and democratic and Western. They really just wanted to be part of Europe. So in that sense, we also have a lot of Western musical influence. Most of the music coming out of the Bosnian War on the Croatian side is going to be rock. There's a lot of hip hop and rap too. The themes tend to err on the side of loss, bravery of soldiers, a desire for peace, and the war to end, and just the general tragedy of war. The goals here were first to portray the Croatians as the victim of Serbian aggressors, and second, to make sure that Croatians weren't painting themselves as retaliators or aggressors in any way. So any music that talked about going to beat up a Serb, that would not fly. They couldn't use the word chetnik, which is an older word for Serb that was considered derogatory. So anything that contained any kind of aggressive language just would not make it. Similarly, very little gruesome or violent imagery on the airwaves. Nothing too bloody. We see some war imagery, but never really like corpses or people being hurt or killed, anything like that. So probably the most famous song to come out of the Croatian side of the Bosnian War is this one, Stop the War in Croatia, and we're going to watch about a minute of this.
Stop the war in the name of Allah. Stop the war in the name of God. Stop the war in the name of children. Stop the war in Croatia. We want to share the European dream. stop the war. You start the war in the name of love.
So this is about as perfect as it gets as far as what the Croatian government wants here. We have children, that's a common theme. We see a lot of diplomacy happening here. Lots of shots, spanning shots of Croatian cities. And the lyrics are in English to address that international audience, and it's also a direct plea to Europe to, you can stop this war, also let us in. So this is kind of a standard song that really set a precedent for Croatian war music that followed it. Another project that was really famous at the time was the Croatian Band-Aid, which was put together by the television broadcasting station that was sponsored by the state. And they basically got every pop star who was anybody in Croatia, and they brought them together to record this song, My Homeland. This setup is, of course, one-to-one based off of the English Band-Aid that had happened in '84 when they record Do They Know It's Christmas? It's recorded in the same way. It has the same studio style. You see them individually, and then you see them all singing in a choir like this. There was also an alternative scene in Croatian war music, though typically it was made up of Western music styles, still just Western music styles that had lyrics or imagery that was too violent to show up on Croatian TV and would potentially mar Croatian victim image. This song here is the exception in that it airs on that more aggressive side, but they never really went any further than this one. Let's watch a little bit of this song. So there are a lot of things in this video that you would not normally see in Croatian war music or music videos. One of them being weapons, guns strapped to these guys' backs, them in military wear, singing about fighting. The only reason this song passed is because the artist, Marco Thompson, who was a soldier himself, his unit was behind him in this video, and they wrote this song and performed it, so he was actually quite popular. But otherwise, this kind of music was not okay with the Croatian government. So let's talk briefly about Bosnia. It's really hard to nail down any specific musical style in Bosnia just because of how diverse it was. It really depended on locality, just where you were. The most influential music in Bosnia was the music in Sarajevo. Sarajevo was besieged for pretty much the entirety of the war. And the culture in Sarajevo was a target for the Serbian invaders, and that included music, so music halls, instruments, music archives, and musicians themselves were also targets. But the music scene did continue, and we got a lot of performances like the one you see on screen here. And whether the Sarajevan government intended it or not, the Western media really snapped this up, and they wrote these sensationalized, emotional stories about this Bosnian musical resistance, and it ended up making Sarajevo this capital of resistance in Bosnia, which was great for the Sarajevan government because they got international attention and they got aid. So whether they intended for that to happen or not, they definitely made use of it. So as we've seen, each of the sides here had a different sort of music that they promoted, but they all very much were active in using music to some extent during the war. Thank you so much for coming to my presentation. If you have any questions or would like to see any other materials or anything, feel free to email me at my email address right here, and have a lovely day.